the UK.
I think it was the first senior politician to come out and say, look, enough is enough. But I'm just trying to be fair that sometimes people make mistakes, and they make mistakes for reasons which are not malign. They did it because they clearly thought this child was in danger, and it appears that he wasn't.
The most talked about radio show is here. Call Clegg. 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Leading Britain's conversation. This is Call Clegg with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
It's 9 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of September. That means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC. So do get in touch in the next half an hour or so if you want to get involved. Call on 0345 6060 973. Email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk. And, of course, as ever, you can watch on the website lbc.co.uk. So the first caller is Anthony in Kennington. Hello, Anthony.
Hello, Nick. Yeah, it's just something I thought about. If an independent Scotland, with the Queen as head of state, can't keep the pound, I'm wondering why, because other self-governing territories, such as the Isle of Man, Gibraltar, Channel Islands, used the pound. Even the Republic of Ireland, when it was before it went to the punt, had the pound in the sterling area. So what's the problem with Scotland?
I think the point that Mark Carney in particular was making the other day was that if you sort of think it through, if Scotland were to become an independent country, and needless to say, I fervently hope, with every shred of my political beliefs and values and so on, that the people of Scotland will choose otherwise. But if Scotland were to become independent, you'd then have a separate country wanting to do separate things with its budget, with its taxes, with its public spending and so on and so forth. But it would have interest rates set somewhere else, down here. And I think the point is that if that creates an inbuilt tension, which all the evidence shows is over a period of time becomes increasingly unsustainable unless you actually go full circle and end up having the same kind of fiscal policies and the same kind of arrangements, which then begs the questions, well, why then, what's the point of seeking independence if in fact your economic policy would become more dependent on the decisions taken in another country? And I think there's a strong feeling that, given that obviously oil revenue's running out, that given that there are all sorts of benefits to being part of the United Kingdom in terms of raising the revenue to fund for the NHS and public services and so on, that independent observers like the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said there'd be this huge black hole to be made up with spending cuts or tax increases, by the way, none of which Alex Salmond seems to acknowledge. So in other words, you'd need to make some pretty tough decisions pretty early on to try and balance the books, because the cost of borrowing money for an independent Scotland would be much, much higher, because people would be, the international markets and all the rest of it, would be much less willing to lend the money in the first place. So for all of those reasons, I think the feeling is, look, if an independent country with an independent currency, that's one thing, or joining the euro, well, they can sort of try their chances on that. But sort of trying to have it both ways, both be independent, but also basically have everything run in Threadneedle Street in London, I think most experts have looked at this and said it just doesn't make sense.
Anthony, quick response from you.
Well, I'm not an economist, but I feel that if Scotland want it, why not let them have it and take the responsibility?
Well, because how can I put it? It's British sterling. It's the British pound. It's a pound which is underwritten, if you like, by the Bank of England. What you're saying is that a country which may or may not manage to balance its book, may or may not manage to borrow successfully in the international markets, may or may not be able to carry the huge liabilities in the banking system and honour its debts and so on. You can't in the long run, you can't expect the English taxpayers who stand behind the Bank of England to underwrite all those risks, which will become far greater in an independent Scotland. And that's why I think it's quite right that the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat parties, all of the parties, have said, look, the one thing we should be really clear about is it is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And I know Alex Salmond says, "Oh, that's scaremongering." It's not actually. I think it's quite responsible to say to the people of Scotland, they have the vote in this. I don't. I suspect you don't either, Anthony. We don't have a vote in this, but I think it's right for us to say, look, if you are going to choose for independence, please be aware that that this option that Alex Salmond just constantly asserts is going to happen cannot and will not and should not happen, because it would be economically very irresponsible to do so.
We move on to other calls.
Andy in Wembley. Hello, Andy.
Hello, mate.
Hello.
Just a bit. I noticed that you went up to Scotland yesterday with the other two cronies and went up to try and make the no vote count. All I've got to say to you is I think you sort of wasted your time going up there, because what you stand for and what you do.
Well, look, what I stand for, I mean, you and I are just going to have to agree to disagree, Andy. I mean, I don't have a vote. I'm an English MP. I represent the people of Sheffield Hallam in the southwest of Sheffield. None of my constituents have a vote. But actually, I so happen to know, I mean, I'll be up there in my own constituency this evening. Actually, I think I know, certainly speaking on behalf of my constituents that I represent in a great northern city like Sheffield, people might not have a vote, but they really, really care. This affects everybody, and I think to say, Andy, that just because someone doesn't have a vote, they can't express an opinion that they feel, as I feel very strongly, that the United Kingdom, it may have its flaws, it may have its imbalances, but we've done extraordinary things as a family of nations. You know, defeated fascism in Europe, created the NHS, created the modern welfare state, competed successfully at the Olympic Games, all the amazing things that scientists, economists, inventors and artists have done together, north and south of the border. This is an amazing thing, and I just think, you know, I mean, Andy, my view is that there are huge differences between Scotland and England and between the different parts of the United Kingdom. And those differences, by the way, will get bigger in future as more power is devolved to Scotland. But having you can rejoice in those differences without ripping the whole thing apart. That's the key message, surely. Why can't we agree, and I hope people will agree, that you have these great differences, they already exist, and they will exist further with the plan for further devolution of powers to Scotland, but do it without severing all of the links that actually have served us very well. And one final thing can I say to you, Andy, in this is, look at the world around us, Andy, and I can't think of a single major challenge that we face in the world, and it's an insecure, dangerous world, to which the answer is that we start turning our backs against each other. Climate change, financial instability in the international markets, extremist violence, cross-border crime, all these issues which every single nation around the world faces, are all faced better, and we are stronger and more secure when we work together rather than fall apart. And that's why, as you can hear, Andy, I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not pretending I've got to vote. Certainly not pretending that somehow English politicians can tell people in Scotland how to vote. But it does seem to me we're entitled to put our point of view.
How was it orchestrated that the three of you all went up yesterday, Deputy Prime Minister?
So I think David Cameron and Ed Miliband decided they didn't want to, for I think very good reasons. They said, look, if this is such a momentous decision, and it is such a momentous, I mean, I can't think of a more momentous decision during my political lifetime, because this is a decision forever. I mean, I've heard about some people who think, oh, well, we can vote for independence, but then we can kind of change it all later. No, you know, once you walk through this door, that's it. And then so they said, they agreed earlier in the week, since they're the main combatants in Prime Minister's questions, they said, look, I don't think we should do it this week. And immediately got in touch with me, and I said, no, absolutely, that sounds like a good idea. Everybody separately, not together, separately in their own way, in their own words, in the places where we choose, should seek, as I explained to Andy, to put our points of view forward.
What is Devo Max? Explain it to my listeners. We're confused.
It's really simple. So, as everybody knows, I hope they know, Scotland already has its own legal system, its own education system. This coalition government, 3 years ago, passed a new Scotland Act, which was the biggest transfer of further powers in tax raising and borrowing powers to Scotland. Actually, the biggest transfer of new, what they call fiscal powers, since the Union was formed 300 years ago. And what's happened is, and this is new. I mean, my party, I think people who follow this know this, have been going on for generations about the need to have something which we call home rule. In other words, home rule within Scotland, but within the stability and security of the United Kingdom. And that's, Liberals have been arguing that for years. But what's eluded us for a long time is having all the main parties saying, now let's do this. And then on August the 5th, David Cameron, Ed Miliband and myself came together, and it was a breakthrough announcement, and we said, for the first time, all the parties now agree that, assuming Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom, as we all fervently hope, then there will be an irreversible process of further powers, in addition to the ones I've already described, in tax, in borrowing, in welfare, provided
Where did
to
you get the mandate for this, then?
Well, my party's been arguing this for years and years and years.
Yes,
I think it's been in every single one of our
matters. How much will this cost?
Well, actually, it's about giving more financial responsibility to Scotland.
Right.
It's very important to remember this. You know,
There'll be a cost attached, obviously. How much will come out of the English coffers or the UK coffers, then, that will go to Scotland?
Actually, I'd recast it in a slightly different light. What we're saying is that more of the money that is spent in Scotland should be raised in Scotland and entirely free for Scotland to decide.
So how much won't come south of the border?
As I say, that depends on the final agreement about exactly which.
We don't know, do we?
Well, no, we know, for instance, that both the Conservative and Liberal Democrats, for instance, believe that income tax powers should be devolved in full to Scotland.
Right.
And
suppose they decide on a 20% tax.
Well, then they're free to do that.
Right. Well, what's going to happen to our coffers?
Well, they're free to decide whatever they want with their own taxes.
We get X from Scotland. Suddenly, the X vanishes because they've decided.
No, under something called the Barnett formula.
That's where everybody gets £1,300 more.
Money
if you live in
flows,
Scotland.
if you like, from other parts of the United Kingdom to Scotland, which is one of the reasons.
But that would cease, obviously.
No, there'd still be, of course, some arrangements if Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom. Of course.
Well, what is the total cost of this, Mr. Clegg?
Well, as I say, I can't give you a sum until all the parties, and by the way, people beyond politics make a final decision on exactly which taxes. But all I'm saying to you is what we want to see is the vast bulk of the money spent in Scotland raised in Scotland. So far from asking more money from other parts of the United Kingdom, this is about giving greater autonomy and greater responsibility to Scottish governments in the future. And I think that's what people in Scotland want. They want to be able to take decisions for themselves, for the services they provide locally, yes, as part of the United Kingdom, but with greater freedom to decide these things for themselves.
You're nothing if not a smart man. What happens when the Welsh want something like this, or the Northern Irish?
Well,
or the
they do already.
Cornish?
They do. Well,
when the Cornish want their own tax-raising
here's the thing. I think we're onto something really, really big here, and I think, by the way, this is going to loom massively in British politics.
Really? More and more, Devon?
Look, we cannot. I think it's a really good thing that we're devolving more power to Scotland. I think it's a really good thing we're devolving more power to Wales. There's something called the Silk Commission, which you see you're grimacing. You haven't even heard of it. We've actually devolved very significant new powers.
To your superior knowledge on a regular basis.
Now, I want that framed and hung up in this radio studio from now.
Let's see what I can do.
We've already devolved significant new powers to Wales, right? On the back of something called the Silk Commission, which was an all-party commission. There was a referendum held, do you remember, in Wales?
Yes.
Three years ago or so.
That.
So there is a process already of very significant devolution taking place as power is devolved, quite rightly, to Edinburgh, to Cardiff. The thing that you're touching, which I think is hugely important, is, well, what about England? What about England? Why doesn't Manchester, why doesn't Sheffield, why don't MP, why don't places like that, great places like that, have more say over their own affairs? And I think people are dead right. It's not the status quo. It cannot carry on that we have this I think, very, very welcome process of devolution to the nations of the United Kingdom, but somehow keep England as centralised as it is. And I think the cat is now out of the bag, that whatever happens on the 18th, and even if Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom, I think we'll not only see further devolution to Scotland, we'll see a massive debate, and I'm going to be right up there on the kind of
the picket line.
On the picket line, arguing in favour of more power for the communities and people in England.
Like Cornwall.
Yes.
Or the West Midlands, or wherever you want to say.
Absolutely. Now, then the question is how you do it. I personally think the old Labour approach of always doing it from the top down. Do you remember these regional quangos that didn't mean anything to anybody? Yeah. I heard, was it the other night, that lots of Conservatives want a new body with lots of new politicians in it. I don't think, frankly, new politicians in English Parliament, whatever you call it, is the answer. For me, the answer is you give much more power and authority to the counties and the cities of our country, so that they can
What
take.
you and your colleagues do all day long then? We won't need a House of Commons.
Well, you're right. We'd spend much less time fiddling around telling people across the country what to do when it's no business of national politicians to constantly put on those. We'd be much more like a lot of other countries around the world, whether it's the United States or Germany or other countries, where you have basically a much more sensible division of labour, where people locally are trusted to take decisions locally, and you don't have everything second-guessed by busybody politicians and bureaucrats in Whitehall.
Yeah.
And, if there's one thing I've always been, passionately, is a believer that you've got to trust people. So, yes, it's great we're going to we're going to transfer massive new powers to Scotland, new powers to Wales. I want to see that same zeal for letting go of power from London for England as well.
Because when I lived in the States, in New York State, Connecticut suddenly reduced its own sales tax. So everybody, when they wanted to buy anything, they just go into Connecticut. And, of course, New York, so then they had to fall in line. So these sort of powers are really useful.
Yeah, well, look, you've already got... This is the interesting thing, by the way, final thing on this.
Yeah.
Alex Salmond already has significant tax varying powers in Scotland. Guess what? He never chose to use them. He never chose to use the powers he's got to vary tax rates already. Now, I think we need to go further, but here's the curious thing. I sometimes think Alex Salmond hasn't actually admitted to the very considerable devolution that's already taken place, because he somehow wants to portray the status quo as something where everything's decided in London. That's simply not the case. We now want to go even further. He, curiously, has been the roadblock for actually exercising the great Scottish powers that Scotland already has.
We move on. Final question. Why is he such a wily campaigner, then? Because he has put together a decent campaign, you have to admit.
Oh, yeah. No, look, he's a very good campaigner, and he's a wily politician. I think he's been living and breathing this all his life. I mean, it's his life's mission. But just because something is someone's life's mission doesn't mean the mission is the right thing for the people he seeks to represent. And I must say, one final word on this. I mean, it is becoming almost comic the way that you have major figures raising massive alarm bells, starting massive alarm bells about the economic consequences of independence. Just this morning, did you hear the head of John Lewis saying that prices would go up for shoppers in Scotland?
On the show.
Yeah, you've had. Oh, and then the SNP said, "Oh, he's exaggerating." BP, they say, "Please don't go independent." Oh, they're exaggerating. Shell, oh no, they're exaggerating. Standard Life, oh no, they're exaggerating. RBS, oh no, they're exaggerating. Lloyds, oh, you can't constantly shout people down when very authoritative bodies say this is going to be bad for prices in shops, for jobs in Scotland. You can't keep saying, "Oh, they're just talking nonsense." These are very serious people raising very serious concerns.
There are other issues out there in the United Kingdom. Deputy Prime Minister, where do we go?
Judy in Belsize Park. Hello, Judy.
Good morning, Mr. Clegg. I believe you've got plans now for all 16 to 21-year-olds to get a 66% subsidy or discount on their bus fares, which will be paid for by stopping the winter fuel allowance and the free television licences for pensioners in the higher rate income tax bracket. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. What I find interesting is most people of 16, this is starting at 16, 17-year-olds particularly, still live at home with their parents. These parents could very well be not only in the 40% tax bracket, they could be in the 45% tax bracket, earning over £150,000 a year. And yet they're not going to be means tested. So I would venture to suggest that boys and girls of 16, 17, who might possibly be attending Eton, Harrow, living in a palace, living in a stately home, why would they automatically qualify for this subsidy? And the pensioners who are paying for it actually have a lower income than they do.
I'll tell you why, Judy, because the principal reason is because in the past, the state, the law said you didn't need to carry on in education beyond the age of 16. And what the state then did was, it quite rightly in keeping with that age, supported people, supported all youngsters up to that age to get to school, to get to education and so on. We have raised that age up to 18. So now all youngsters are expected to stay in educational training up to the age of 18. But we haven't changed the rules so that we give the same support to a 17-year-old that we might previously have given to a 15-year-old. So I think, the first and most important thing is if the government of the day says everybody up to the age of 18 is from now on expected to be in education or training, then it cannot be right that you have 17-year-olds in, say, Somerset paying hundreds of pounds a year simply to be able to get to college to discharge their duty, which is now a duty, if you like, imposed from on high, to continue in education. So that's the fundamental reason, is that we as a country have always believed that if you place an expectation on youngsters to be educated up to a certain age, you also have to provide the support so that they can get that education. And we've always done that, if you like, on a universal basis. So to that extent, I think all we're doing is moving with the times. And also, look, we have this debate, by the way, on this programme on a number of occasions. It's a really interesting debate. Is when do you make an entitlement universal, and when do you make it selective? Now, so for instance, on previous times I've had people call in, so, oh, well, why are you giving free school meals to all small little children at school in the first 3 years at primary school and so on? And you've in a sense made a similar point. Now, my answer to that is of course you have to choose. We have chosen, for instance, for generations in this country, that we think that the entitlements of the NHS are universal, that you're not stopped at A&E and asked, whip your chequebook out and tell me how much you pay. There are certain things we just think are universally entitled. And by the way, it's often much, much more straightforward and cheaper to do it that way than go through the whole rigmarole of weeding people
not
up.
If you've just lost your free TV licence.
No. But here's the point.
Briefly, because I must get Judy back in.
I personally, Judy, cannot understand or justify, I suspect you and I will disagree on this, that the richest, some of the richest pensioners get from other hard-pressed taxpayers their TV licence and winter fuel payments paid for, and yet there are young people who are paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
Some of those young people have got iPads.
No, some of them do, but do you know what?
So it's the same principle, surely.
No, well, do you know what? I think it is. I think a lot of grandmothers and grandfathers listening to this would understand that in this day and age, where you have to make choices, where you can't just give everything to everyone for free, it is not a bad thing that you make a choice that the people who are retired but richer and better off than others make a small sacrifice so we can help younger people at the moment can't get to education.
Judy, you're back in.
Mr. Clegg, you have not answered my question.
Well,
I've sought to.
What part's not been answered?
You have not answered my question.
What part, Judy?
The part as to why people who are richer than the people who are subsidising them are getting the subsidy. You have not answered my question.
Well, Judy, can I reverse it then?
No, just answer the question. Just for once in your life as a politician, answer the question.
Judy, I have sought to ask the question by first explaining why...
No, you haven't. You haven't answered my question.
But if you give me...
My question was very, very specific, and you haven't answered it.
I have sought to answer it. You haven't accepted my answer. Let me try once again. Firstly, the age of education has been raised by this government from 16 to 18. Yes. So that's why I think it's right that we also...
But it's the rich parents.
We also...
I think that's what Judy's...
And I separately try to explain to Judy that there are instances where we decide as a society to give universal entitlements, and where Judy and I suspect disagree is I don't find it remotely defensible, morally or otherwise, that there are poor youngsters paying hundreds of pounds just to get to college, whilst there are very wealthy people in retirement who are having poorer taxpayers pay their winter fuel payments and TV licences for them. And I suspect many people in that category would actually agree that for the older generation coming towards the end or after their working life, making a small sacrifice to help youngsters at the beginning of their working life is a good thing to do to make society fairer.
All right, we move on. Judy, thank you. Where do we go
Neil
now?
in Gatwick. Hello, Neil.
Good morning, Nick.
Morning.
And Nick,
hello.
What do you think about the Mayor's scrappage scheme with scrapping? He's saying he wants to scrap 150,000 cars.
Is he
this
sort
is
of
the
set this
idea,
up, is he?
Yeah, this is the idea from Boris Johnson. Diesel car owners should be given up to £2,000 to turn the vehicles into scrap and improve air quality in London. So obviously you get your trade-in price on your diesel car plus an additional up to £2,000. This is because he believes they were falsely encouraged by some previous European research that shows that diesel cars were better. Now we understand they are, in fact, more polluting.
Well, there is an issue about the fact that I think it's. I'm not an expert. I think it's particularly the nitrous oxide emissions from older diesel cars,
right.
and I know that Patrick McLaughlin, the Transport Secretary, is talking to other people in Europe to make sure that.
What about this sort of extra scrappage?
Well, that's Boris Johnson's scheme. You need to ask him how he's going to run it, because I mean this is a Boris announcement, and I never quite know whether Boris announcement whether it's actually going to happen or whether it's just floating the idea or he expects someone else to pick up the tab. But it's his idea, and if he can make it work, good luck to him.
While we're on the subject of Boris Johnson, who of course is one of the other major political forces,
part of your vast collection of people who now traipse into this studio.
Traipse is your choice as well. I think come in with a spring in their step in your case, Mr. Clegg.
Yes.
But I've added another signing. I feel like Jose Mourinho or Arsene Wenger. Nigel Farage will be joining me as of tomorrow.
Yeah. It's every I was about to say every Tom, Dick or Harry. It's every Tom, Dick or Harriet, isn't it, these days? There's a good one.
Yes,
fortnightly. Christmas crackers come early.
Fortnightly.
Yes, I know. Well, catch up Charlie, as he's known otherwise. I look forward to hearing him. But I don't know why he's not putting a proper shift in and doing it every week. But maybe you can ask him.
Perhaps he's in Europe.
Yes.
Is that your question?
Maybe that's right. Maybe he's enjoying the lavish expenses that he does as an MEP in Europe. But I think he should do it every week.
Watch this space, Nigel Farage. We'll put that to him, Mr. Clegg. On to calls for today. Where do we go next?
Emma in Nottingham. Hello, Emma.
Morning.
Morning.
Hi. I was just wondering, do you really think it's possible for people with mental health problems to be seen as a priority in the NHS?
Emma, do you speak with any personal experience, or?
Yeah, I do. I've been agoraphobic for a long time.
Right. And have you been? How have you found the help you've got from the NHS?
I found the actual help I've got good, but it's more a case of getting the right help at the right time.
That's right.
And the sooner you're seen, obviously you're dealing with a smaller problem. If it's left for a long time, it's a bigger problem, both for the patient, obviously, and.
Emma, I mean, Emma, as you know from your own experience, and I've been going on about this for years. In fact, I think it was the thing I first raised when I first became leader of my party in Prime Minister's Question 7 years ago. I think the kind of way in which the mental health services have been treated as a Cinderella service in the NHS is one of the biggest problems that we have in our health system in our country, alongside, by the way, the fact that social care and healthcare often don't work together properly. And we've done a lot of things, not least at my instigation and that of Norman Lamb, the Lib Dem minister who leads on this in government, to change this. So, for instance, we've rewritten what is in effect the kind of mandate, the constitution for the NHS, and said to NHS managers, you are now duty-bound to put mental health on the same level as physical health. Huge progress has been made to lift the kind of taboo around this. I mean, I want to live in a country where people can talk as freely about their mental health issues as they can about the fact that they've sprained their ankle. We need to get away from this idea that mental health is something which you need to be a bit embarrassed about and you can't talk about. It affects 1 in 4 families in this country. Now, we've put a whole lot of extra money into things called talking therapies. We've tried to deal with something you may have experienced yourself, which is this terrible cliff edge where young people who get help for their mental health services, as soon as they turn into adulthood, they're kind of left to fend for themselves again. But there's a long, long way to go. And I was really delighted to see that the Chief Medical Officer, I think this might be what you're alluding to, Emma, this week, in her first annual report, singled this out as one of the most important things facing the country.
How can we deliver? I think this is a delivery question.
Well, I actually think what I call equality of esteem, which is really starting to seep through the system, is already translating into lots and lots of individual decisions being taken by clinicians and by people who commission the care, in other words, who decide where the money goes, that they're increasingly recognising that mental health and physical health have to be treated the same. I want to move to a situation where the waiting time expectations that people have to be seen for a physical health issue apply pretty well in exactly the same way for mental health. Why should a mental health...
Do we have the money? Do we have the funding?
Well, that's the issue. That's where you need to cross the T's and dot the I's. I don't think we're going to do this overnight. I really do think we've made massive... And I want to pay tribute to the people like Stephen Fry, Alistair Campbell, MPs in the House of Commons, who just talk more openly about the fact. And the moment you do that, and if people at the school gates can talk about mental health issues, because it affects so many people, just as they do at physical health, that in itself will have a dramatic effect on the way that GPs and clinicians act. But I think if we can can also move, as I say, we've got this legal expectations, this kind of sort of constitutional almost expectation now for the mandate in the NHS that mental health and physical health are treated in the same way. I want to now move further and make sure that people also feel that they're entitled to the same waiting time, waiting times as they have enjoyed for a long time. In
one last one and an email, perhaps. Go with that question first.
David in Mill Hill. Hello, David.
Yeah, good morning. I'd like to know why you've reneged on the boundary arrangements you made with the Conservatives.
So what happened was, this is going back some time now, was that in the coalition agreement we said there was a bunch of political reforms that we would do together. We would introduce funding reform for political parties, because the way that parties are funded, as you know, is pretty ropey. We would introduce elections, so you've got to say, David, as much as anybody else, about who makes the laws of the land in the House of Lords. We would look at boundaries and so on and so forth. And basically what happened was the deal fell apart because, from my point of view, the Conservatives didn't honour their side of the bargain when it comes to House of Lords reform, didn't, along with the Labour Party, honour their side of the bargain on party funding. So we got less done. So what's happened on boundaries is, all that's happened is that we're missing a beat, if you like. The next boundary review, instead of taking place in 2013, will now take place in 2018. But look, I'm afraid.
Hold on a minute. Surely that's going to affect our voting rights. If we're now going to be stuck with a Labour government, hopefully we won't be because of Scotland leaving us. But otherwise, we're going to be stuck with a Labour government because you haven't agreed to changing the boundaries. So what you're doing is, in fact, crawling up the bottom of the Labour Party.
Oh dear, right. No, I don't think I'm hideous thoughts. I'm not crawling or anywhere near, remotely near that place. No, David, look, I'm afraid it is just as I described. In a coalition, you set out to the British people, as we did in the coalition agreement, what you're going to do together. That obviously is a kind of a deal where parties bring different things to the table. And in this area, there was just a total failure of the Conservative Party. By the way, not only to deliver what was in the coalition agreement, to deliver their own commitments to House of Lords reform. And so, I'm assuming you do. I don't know what line of work you're in, but it's kind of deal's a deal. If the deal is sort of called off by one side, then you can't expect.
You didn't do the deal. Well, you threw your toys out the pram because you couldn't get the Lords review.
No, David. Well, anyway, look,
you have.
Okay. Well, I suspect whatever I say, you're going to make the same assertion.
We are coming close, and I need to get a couple of emails in just very quickly. One question from me, actually, before the final email. We all know how you feel and how the Prime Minister feels, how Mr Miliband feels, and you want it desperately to be a no vote. Of course, if it goes against you, what level of preparation has been done in Whitehall for whatever needs to happen next Friday or Saturday or the following Monday?
No preparation, because...
Pardon?
No preparation, because... I think it's incredibly important that as a government that governs for the whole of the United Kingdom, is we don't, as a government, start planning to govern for what would then become a different country.
Wouldn't that just have been prudent to know a little bit of what you're going to do on Friday afternoon?
No, I think people would say, well, hang on a minute, you're campaigning with every ounce of energy you've got, every ounce of energy you've got to retain Scotland within the United Kingdom, but actually you're somehow kind of furtively planning for something else. No, what
happens on Monday?
Well, as
everybody
I say,
scrambles around like crazy people.
Well, as I say, if Scotland were to get his way and Scotland were to sever its links from the United Kingdom, there would be massive consequences. By the way, not least very, very serious economic ones, as you've heard from oil companies, banks, retailers.
Meanwhile, in Whitehall, nobody even saw it coming.
No, it's not that. It's just we are here. We have a mandate to govern for the country, for the country as a whole. All three parties believe that what we should be doing is devoting all our time to making that case, and that is what we're doing.
But when we came into the new millennium, companies spent hundreds of thousands of pounds because it was believed that planes would drop out of the sky and traffic lights would all go out and bank accounts would be wiped out. Do you remember companies put in all these sort of special measures? Thank the Lord, none of it was required. Meanwhile, in UK PLC, the possibility that part of our cherished union might wander off elsewhere, nobody's done anything.
We feel so strongly that the right thing for the United Kingdom, for everybody, but by the way, as you know, this affects not only people north of the border, it affects everybody. It affects my kids, my grandchildren, future generations across the United Kingdom. So I think it's right that the government of the United Kingdom should be solely devoted to making the case that Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom and not somehow kind of on the side in some secret room planning for planning for exactly what we don't want to happen.
We've got a minute left. Perry says, Nick Clegg has been going on and on about his school meals. He said if kids cannot concentrate if they have no lunch, how do Muslim children manage not eating at all during Ramadan?
Well, I'm not for one moment pretending that the measures we've introduced of giving a healthy, nutritious meal at lunchtime is going to cut across Ramadan. I mean, Ramadan is a devoutly held.
Have these measures worked? Do you know there's only one way of telling about these school meals, Mr. Clegg?
Oh.
Well, as they often say, the proof of the pudding
is in the eating.
And under the school meal plan today, the pudding is beetroot and cocoa cake with cocoa custard.
Where?
Here. I've got the kids. This is schools right across London from a company called Kids Lunch Co. There is a beetroot and what is it again? Beetroot, and I've got one too. Beetroot and cocoa cake.
Looks delicious.
With cocoa
You're
custard.
inviting me to eat it now.
I'm inviting you to see if the proof of the pudding. Do you know, I can't even open this packet. There we go. Yeah. If the proof of the pudding is.
Want some help?
No, I'm there now. Would you like to try?
I already have the pudding and custard.
Yep, this is what children are tucking into.
Excellent.
Actually, to produce that on that kind of scale is fantastic.
It's fantastic. And,
the policy clearly works.
It
Another
does
vote
work.
winner.
It does
and
work.
tasty
I know.
too.
Very good. Tested here in the laboratory that is the LBC
Now,
studio.
next week, we have to do it on Wednesday, of course, because we have that major vote. A final sentence, and it has to be a sentence for reasons of balance and everything else. Why should people vote the way they should next Thursday in Scotland, Deputy Prime Minister?
Because there are huge differences between Scotland, England and other parts of the United Kingdom. But let's not sever all the links that have held us together. We've been a very, very, very successful, remarkably successful family of nations. We're stronger, we're better, we're more secure, we're more prosperous together, we're weaker apart.
Thanks for that. Call Clegg next Wednesday, of course. News next here on LBC.
Nick Clegg has told LBC Scotland can't have it both ways if it votes for independence next week. The Deputy Prime Minister says it would be economically irresponsible